little bit late. I think we're starting about 2 minutes late. First off, I just want to welcome everyone to the Halo Universe Authors Panel here at Day 2 of Halo Fest. Welcome, everyone. And the gentleman to my right has been teasing me for the last couple of days because apparently I have a habit of forgetting to introduce everyone because I just assume everyone knows everyone since, you know, they're way more famous than I am. So I'm David Ellis, content producer at 343 Industries. And we have a pretty awesome panel lined up. To my right is Mr. Kevin Grace, franchise manager at 343. And moving on down the line, Eric Wynn, who is a famous comic book artist who's worked on the Halo franchise at Marvel. Karen Travis, upcoming author of Halo Glasslands. Also joining us from the house that Marvel built, Mr. Brian Reed, a writer at Marvel. And a man who doesn't need any introduction, but I'll give it to him anyway, Mr. Greg Bear. So right off the bat, I want to just set the stage for this. This is a Halo Universe Authors Panel. So if you haven't read any of the Halo fiction, the Halo books, you might get a little lost, so just be aware of that. I want to kick it off to Kevin. Back at Comic-Con, we talked a little bit about the fact that there was a shift a few years ago as it relates to the Halo fiction, and that going forward, every piece of the Halo fiction, whether it's told in books, comics, games, is going to be connected in meaningful ways. I was wondering if you could kind of expound on what we meant by that.
Hello. Is this all right? We're on. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we meant exactly that. Is that one of the most fun things, especially for me as a writer and a lover of good stories, is that the universe has lots of different kinds of stories that we can tell in lots of different mediums, and that we can do all these things in a way. I get two mics.
We're going to switch over.
Hello. Is that better?
No.
That's worse. We're going backwards. All right. Is that with the different stories and different mediums that we can tell them, we've got obviously our main focus is on the video games, and we're very lucky, very fortunate to be able to follow in the history of all the great Halo games. But the books around them let us go into places in the universe that just wouldn't work very well in a video game. Things that would be too complicated, things that would be in some places too slow when you're in the mood to blow something up. But that actually set up some very interesting relationships and kind of the fabric of the universe, all the areas around the games that makes the events that you take part in inside the games more interesting to you if you've been able to consume some of that outside content. If it's in the comic books or the novels or anime, things like that, you can have a little time to spend with characters that are just mentioned in the games perhaps, or with vehicles or planets or dangers that are just hinted at. And then as David led in with, is that the fun thing that we're going to be doing going forward is making sure that all of the stories and all of that environment and all of that fabric that we're creating outside the games also pays off inside the games as well. So if you're somebody who's grabbing every bit of Halo story that's going on out there, you're going to be rewarded by having your in-game experience be richer for having read, for example, Karen's upcoming work in Glasslands, or even in things like the terminals in Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary. Will feed back into, say, Greg's books, for example, or maybe even in the future of some of the games that we're working on at 343. So it's a great opportunity to tie everything in the universe together in a very purposeful way, so that you guys, if you want to put the time into it, we make sure that you get everything possible out of it.
We've talked a little bit in the past on translating what began as a game, which is ultimately a visual medium, into the written word. Let's go back a little bit and talk about the state of the Halo universe as it sits right now. In essence, we're sort of expanding it in two different directions. And that's in no small part due to the efforts of course, Mr. Greg Bear and Ms. Karen Travis, our upcoming Halo Glasslands. I want to start off with Greg. A couple years ago, Frank O'Connor and Kevin Grace came to you with an idea to talk about how maybe we could expand the Halo universe in a big way. I was wondering how the conversation went as far as settling on the idea of tackling the history of the Forerunners and the building of the Halo array.
Well, it's been going very well, and it's a great deal of fun because if I'm ever stuck, I got this whole creative team. I can just, poke and they suddenly come up with a good answer. It's been fascinating to do the origin story for Halo and to figure out what was going on with the Forerunners and the precursors and everything else. And in Volume 2, I'm now moving into rather dangerous territory. So it's going to be an interesting collaboration from this point on as we try to figure out the major reveals about major characters.
In the Forerunners, as you dealt with in the book Halo Cryptum, they've always been a mysterious race with just a shadow of their greatness left in the universe. They're very mysterious. With Cryptum, we finally have the opportunity to get to know these, in essence, almost godlike beings. How did you go about constructing this society that's so very alien from our own?
Well, I got to take a look first at what they left behind. You got to take a look at the architecture, the style, and what it implies, and also what they did. And you're dealing with a kind of a Greek mythology at this point, because they may have been godlike, but they sure made some big things go wrong. They must have made some mistakes to get to that point. So the whole story of the failure of strategy or the success of their strategy, however they look at it, has to devolve upon characters. And Forerunner characters are broken down according to their castes. Now, if you take a look at the Halo universe, the Halos are magnificent. So obviously the architects, the builders, are the most powerful caste. Interestingly enough, in my decision making, I decided the life workers, the librarian, for example, were the least powerful caste. The warrior servants are just above the life workers. So the warriors, the military caste, actually in the beginning of Halo Cryptum are kind of on the outs. So figuring all that out is just trying to reconstruct the mystery backwards, so to speak, and make sense of it as what you're playing in the game goes by. To understand the history, it has to resonate with you, that what you're seeing makes sense in that context.
Having dealt with Cryptum and what went on 100,000 years ago, we're now moving in a space, as we touched on a little bit briefly, moving forward post-Halo 3. We're very lucky to have the two authors, first two authors, have actually dealt with this subject. Mr. Kevin Grace with the short story The Return that appeared in Halo Evolutions, and of course Karen, upcoming novel Halo Glasslands. This question is actually for both of you. How did you both approach establishing kind of the state of the universe as it is post-Halo 3? It was left in pretty much array, yet also in an era of peace.
Well, I'll start off because mine is a much smaller piece of it, and that wasn't actually going in so much to the state of the universe as just the state of that one particular character, the shipmaster in The Return, and looking back on his entire life, his entire belief structure, everything that had driven him forward, that had given him meaning, all of a sudden was revealed to be a lie. And so with all the things that he had done and all the sacrifices that he'd made up until that point, realizing that was, in vain to a certain extent for a culture, for a species that put such a price on honor. And then how would he react in that situation? If everything you believed was all of a sudden a lie, where do you go and where do you start? But again, for me, that was just for one kind of melancholy elite on Walkabout. So I think Karen's having a great deal more fun with that going forward.
Yeah, mine's a sort of factory process. This is, I think, my 22nd novel, so I've pretty well honed it down to a production line now. And I always start. Sorry if I'm not looking at you, but I'm absolutely blinded by the by
your radiance.
Yeah, they probably thought we needed a bit of a tan. The way I always approach any sort of scenario is to say, okay, so this is real. This is happening. Some of you know that I'm a former news journalist, so whenever I look at any scenario, I say, what if this is real? What questions do I want answered? If I could interview these people, what would I be asking? So that helps me formulate a sort of background. This is a post-war scenario where they had two factions. Everybody knew who the enemy was, and now everything's broken up. Well, that's a situation we're all very familiar with in the real world, so you automatically know what happens when you've got a sort of fragmented threat. Once I've established that, then I look at the actual environment and say, what sort of characters, what sort of people would be in that situation? And then you automatically work out the characters who you need to carry the narrative forward. And when you've got a sort of almost an uneasy peace, almost a cold war, not even a cold war, a sort of vacuum breaking out after a nearly 30-year war. The people who are going to be in the ascendancy there are basically the spooks. And I thought, I've never actually done a sort of spy-based sort of novel before. And I thought, I've just got to do those lovely people at ONI. I've got a big soft spot for them. I think they're all sweethearts. There isn't a single weasel or viper in there, I promise you. They're all saints. And obviously, I'll always produce some new characters, but I also cast around to see who we've already got within the IP that I can recycle. And I have to be honest, the minute I saw a 92-year-old serving admiral who was the chief spook and who terrified grown men so that they wet their pants, I thought, I have got to develop that character. And Margaret Parangoski has been an enormous fun, I can honestly say.
I'm in a fortunate position where I often get a chance to read some of these books before they hit the public, and I recently finished Glasslands. And one of the things that stuck out on me is that even though you're dealing with a book that deals with actions that potentially have far-reaching implications for the universe, the characters within it are remarkably grounded. Was that intentional, and if so...
Sorry, I didn't catch what you said. They
So
were
the characters,
what?
they were remarkably grounded.
Oh, yeah. I mean... basically, the whole way that I write fiction is actually through the characters' eyes. I mean, you have to be in their heads, and what you're actually getting is one situation seen through multiple eyes, and they don't see it all the same way. And obviously, given my professional background, I've got a fairly good idea of how soldiers think, the people on the sharp end. I've got a fairly good idea of how politics works. So you just get inside that head, and however, whether you're the chief of ONI or whether you're an ordinary Marine, basically up to your ankles in mud, you can only see the world through your own eyes. You can only engage with it on a sort of human scale. So that's really what it is. I mean, I think one of the things is that a lot of military fiction, and particularly space military fiction, tends to go for a helicopter view of the big picture. Nobody ever sees a war like that until it comes to the history books. Nobody who's involved in it ever sees the same war. It doesn't. Even the commanding officers. If you speak, I was sort of interviewing people only 5 years after the Falklands War, and even the senior commanders saw it differently. And you realise that it's a very human thing, and it's about personal experiences and what happens within a 24-hour period, and what happens to your mates, and whether you get any sleep for 3 days. And it doesn't matter who you are. Those are the things that drive you, and those are the things that drive the way you fight the war and the way you basically bond and interact with the people around you.
In addition to the variety of new characters you're introducing in Glasslands, we're also dropping in on some old, let's call them acquaintances. We're dealing with the issues of Dr. Halsey and the other remnants in Onyx. I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on your thoughts on the so-called mother of the Spartan 2 program.
Yeah, sorry. This is where we get into spoiler. This is where we get into dangerous spoiler territory. So someone can kick me under the table if I say too much. But she's an interesting character, and she isn't someone you can leave alone. I did debate whether to leave her on Onyx or not, and leave it a fry and go off and do another story. But this is a woman who's got a really shocking history, and all I could see were these people whose lives she had utterly ruined, regarding her as Mendes calls it, the Virgin Mary. And I thought, there's got to be some other way of looking at her. So what we're really seeing is she has to confront Spartans that she didn't bless or make this time. These are her children conceived out of wedlock that she doesn't want to acknowledge. And just to see their reaction to her. I won't spoiler that, because so many people who've read the book already have come up to me and said, that bit there where so-and-so does that, wow. So just to say, look out for some Halsey scenes with Spartans.
In essence, you're telling the main thrust of the story in Glasslands is the story of some characters dealing with the elite culture and ODSTs, but obviously you mentioned you're talking about Dr. Halsey a bit as part of the storyline. You're dealing with almost two parallel stories, in essence, with a twist, but I'm wondering if there were any special challenges in writing those two themes and weaving them into one coherent narrative.
Well, you're actually dealing with three, I think, because, this just shows how mechanistic I am. When I'm planning a story, I just draw columns. I mean, people often come up and look at my paper and say, are you actually doing your, are you doing your books? Is this your tax return? I said, no, this is me planning a story. And I'll do columns, and I'll slide them up and down as to who's doing what. But we've got the action with the ODSTs and the ONI team. I don't think I'm revealing too much if I say that the ODSTs are recruited to do some very mucky black ops for ONI. Then we've got what goes on within the Dyson sphere on Onyx, or what was Onyx, the sort of space previously known as Onyx, which has got a little symbol. And then we've got what happens with the Sangheili, and you actually see what's happening within Sangheili society, which is not what the humans necessarily think is happening. One of the great things about this, I remember post-war, all the infrastructure is broken down. So you're back to a nice fog of war situation where nobody knows what's happening. You're not sure which planets have actually been glassed or not because there's no comms. So you can really look at these people struggling to find their way in the new order without a full fact sheet of information. And basically the way I write most books is to do these parallel storylines. I either do them within the same time frame, or, as you've probably seen, if you read a certain other franchise that I write for, I basically do 2 separate timelines with 3 separate strands of stories. So you do. They're not books that you can read when you're watching the telly or doing something else. You have got to pay attention, and I'll be asking questions later. You will get a test at the end of this book.
Karen, we talked a little bit about dealing with ODSTs and characters who are kind of in the thick of it. Eric, you're no stranger to that with your work on Hell Jumpers. I'm curious if what your thoughts are on translating your autistic vision from the game space in 3D to a 2D constrained medium in the realm of comics.
Well, the hard part about doing the ODST was that it was the schedule was it would be released a little bit before the game, and knowing how Halo fans are, how they are, I mean, you try to change a little bit or maybe give a stylistic opinion on something. It's crazy, and especially the time when I was doing both the line art, pencils, and color. So it gives me a good creative control, but yet also that stress level of, okay, I got to make this the best it can be, and also relate it in the same way as what Halo has already predetermined things to be, and that's always a hard part, style versus what you think, will it be right or wrong? I mean, but sometimes you just got to, I mean, for me, I'll think about it for too much and then I'll break myself, and so, but hopefully what I did for ODST was what made people happy. I mean, that's all. At the end of it, that's all you can do is, just give your best shot at it.
I think Eric actually is being a little humble. He was really great to work with as we were going through. Like you said, we wanted the book to support and add a little bit more to the Halo 3 ODST game that was coming out right about then. And he was really easy to work with and getting lots of assets from the game. So what did this ODSTs, their armor look like, their weapons, using everything that we already had established on the grunts and the elites and the rest of the Covenant fun in the universe. And so it was a fun process. It was a crazy process, you're right, because of schedule, with the timing going back and forth. But I think it was a pretty good partnership and a good way to take all the goodness that obviously that Bungie was cooking into the game and find ways to get more fun, get more stories out of it. So.
And talking a little bit more about translating mediums a little bit, Brian, your work on translating The Fall of Reach to the Marvel Comics series, you're not only dealing with a universe that's established, it has a visual look to it, but you're also translating a novel to comic. I'm wondering what were some of the challenges that you encountered on translating that?
The biggest thing was really finding time to compress time, I guess. You could have scenes that would take place, over a few seconds that cover, 20 pages of novel. And how do you condense all of the emotion and all of the thoughts that are going on in characters' minds into 2 panels? And then second to that, I saw a lot of stuff that I wanted to just build and stick into the universe. All this talk of Colonel Watts, who was leading this resistance against the UNSC. I was so intrigued by in the novel that I wanted to write this extra stuff as well as all of the stuff that was already there. So it became this real fun juggling act of what's important to have, what do you need, what can you cut out, what can you kind of tap dance around, and a little bit like kind of a movie adaptation of it's not going to be exactly what the novel was, but we're going to find new ways to give you the experience and take you through the same story.
So going back real quick to Glasslands, you talked a little bit about that Karen's story will have some impact on the upcoming story for Halo 4. I'm wondering, Kevin, I'm going to throw you under the bus on this one, if you can kind of expand on this thought a little bit and maybe offer some hints to the audience.
Well, I mean, obviously, Karen's novel is taking place in the time frame after Halo 3, after the last time we saw Master Chief, and obviously it'll be setting up, like I mentioned earlier, some of that fabric of the universe around. So whatever Master Chief is going to get up to in Halo 4, obviously it's not going to take place in a vacuum. It's going to take place on a much larger stage, and so we'll be able to start taking a look at some of the state of the universe there. I find myself suddenly terribly distracted by some strange friends in the back. So yeah, but other than that, David, no, I'm not going to talk about directly how it feeds into the Halo 4 story, because Frank lurks around us.
We got
and he would kill me.
something going on over here.
Yeah.
Spartans, you want to take care of these guys real quick so we can get back to the panel? Zombies, what are you going to do?
They're cuter than the Flood. I want to throw flowers.
Going back to, again, real quick, Kevin, we talked a little bit about, as we clear the undead here, we talked a little bit about adding terminals to the upcoming campaign for Halo Anniversary. What was the main reason for this additional narrative layer to the original story of the Master Chief and the Halo Ring?
Well, I mean, the biggest motivation, I think, for adding the terminals in Combat Evolved Anniversary was just because they've become really a favorite little bit of fiction that the fans have grown to love since Halo 3, and then Sadie's story in ODST and the data pads in Reach. So it's a good opportunity to expand a little bit of that extra universe around the games for the people who aren't reading the novels or checking out the comic books or just playing the games. They can see what's going on around these events and a little bit more to, if you want to take the time to learn a little bit more about Guilty Spark through these videos, that's great. If you'd rather stick with blowing things up, that's cool. That's your choice as well. But if you want to take the time and kind of learn a little bit more about the Halo, where it came from, and what this thing is, why what it was for, and why you might need to be completely terrified by it, there'll be an interesting new little addition to the story through the terminals and Anniversary.
So going back to Greg real quick, for those of you that have read Halo Cryptum, kind of left on a bit of a cliffhanger there at the end of the book. I'm wondering, you were picking that up, I guess, a little bit with Halo Primordium when it launches. I'm wondering if you can offer some teasers for some fans in the audience who may have read Cryptum and for what they can expect in the next book.
Well, some of my favorite characters are coming back in Primordium, and they have a first-person point of view this time. So if they've been on the periphery before and we've been kind of tracking from a Forerunner point of view, we're now going back to a human point of view. And that gives us more insight, since these characters are also carrying, in a sense, many other characters with them, as we learned in Cryptum. We are going to be learning much more about the first Halo Forerunner, the first Forerunner human war. And we're going to get more insight into the conflicts that led to what happened with the precursor, the last precursor. So that's been very interesting for me to try to figure this out, and I'm not sure I have just yet. And I've actually said some really interesting things in this book that haven't been vetted, so I better keep my lips sealed for the moment.
Brian, if I give you the nod, you're supposed to throw yourself on Greg to stop any further talking.
So, Kevin, once again, we talked a little bit about how the two stories, the two timelines, with Greg in 100,000 years in the past with the Halo array, and Karen moving forward, would kind of deal with some issues, once again, going back to Halo 4 a little bit. I'm wondering if we can talk about how it relates to the Forerunners, or how it relates to even this universe left in array. What your thoughts are on these two stories and how they're kind of going along in parallel, yet in very different timelines.
Well, the reason that we've decided to move kind of in both those directions at the same time, or one of them, is that we have to keep expanding this universe. We have to keep putting new things out there to keep everybody entertained and to keep the new stories coming. Most of the action in the Halo universe so far has taken place actually in a pretty small slice of time. Relatively speaking. I mean, we've got 100,000 years or so to play with, and really just like a year and a half, a couple of years, is where most of the stories that most people know about have taken place. So there's lots of extra room in the universe, and so someone who's going far, far back, like with Greg, to kind of set up where some of these mysteries came from with the Forerunners, And then with Karen, moving forward into the universe, we're going to move into some new territory. It's all going to be familiar. It's all going to feel very comfortable. But we need to keep challenging people to keep people coming back and to make sure that the fan community keeps having stuff to check us on. So Mr. Loftus can continue to have stuff to measure and send us notes about.
So speaking of that fan community, I think we're going to take some questions from the audience. So if we can line up calmly in order.
Uh-oh, that was fast.
So go ahead.
My favorite part of these shadows.
This one's for Kevin. On Reach, how did Chief get to Gamma Station?
Sorry?
How did Chief get to Gamma Station on Reach?
Get to Gamma Station on Reach. That's one that we haven't gotten into all the way yet. So we can't. I don't think we're gonna get into every particular inch of all the stories here. But I don't know. That's something we might play with a little bit later on. But we haven't got that one fully defined just yet.
Because that one's left a little in the cloud there. Because what happens at the end of Reach the game in autumn? It's just any particular insight onto that?
I mean, in the games, we cover the stories very specifically that are covered in the games and those details. There's 1,000 things around each of the events in the stories in the game or in the events in the books that the universe doesn't cover completely. I mean, it offers us interesting opportunities later on, like Brian was talking about earlier with Watts, and going further into kind of some of the personalities behind the insurrection. That was mentioned early on in the Fall of Reach, is that all those details aren't specifically in that particular book, but they were all taking place around it. I mean, it's like any history of any event. You've got kind of one story or even a collection of stories around it, but it's by no means everything that happened around all of those bits and pieces. And so we've got the stories, obviously, that we've got out in the universe right now, and it's pretty fun to have all this room to move into the events around them, to flesh them out at some point in time, if it's the right story for us to work on in the universe, and really if it's what everybody, frankly, what everybody here in this room and elsewhere who loves Halo wants us to do.
And a lot of fun of any universe that you're working in is finding those things that interest people and going, well, what happened here? And your first reaction might be, well, it doesn't matter. And then you think about it for 5 minutes, you're like, well, wait, that's actually a really cool story. How did that happen? And you start piecing that together, and then you get 10 more new things out of it. Where's Frank going?
Well, Frank's selling books. Thanks, Frank.
Before I ask Kevin Grace,
Make it rain, Cryptum.
So we're giving away copies of Halo Cryptum to everyone asking questions here today.
Frank will judge your niceness.
So the Reach question that was just asked, well, Bungie said yesterday there was no problem, earlier today, that there was no holes in the canon, so we're good, right?
Oh, yeah, I think we're good. Yeah.
Right.
Everything's
It's official.
Everything's cool. Relax.
all right, so before I ask my question for Kevin Grace, I just want to say, Greg Bear, thank you so much for freaking straining my brain and blowing my mind. The first few pages of Cryptum, I'm like, what? At first I'm like, I automatically recognize it as good writing that I've actually never been able to encounter before, like where it actually made me go, I don't know how to visualize this. So thank you for giving me that sense of wonder that I had with the Halo 1 when I first stepped off, the Bumblebee life pod. I was like, holy crap, how is this even technologically possible? And, what kind of people must these have been? Thank you for introducing it to us, and yet at the same time not spelling it out so that it's like, plain as day, okay, I know what a Forerunner is about, blah, blah, blah. Kevin, so the elites, the Sangheili, is that Sangheili?
Sangheili.
Sangheili are an honor-bound race, right?
Yep.
So what I was just wondering, since they found out that they knew that the Forerunners existed before they entered the covenant with the prophets, right? Mm-hmm. So they revered the Forerunners. They were their gods, right? And they just found out, they didn't just find out, I don't know yet, but I believe they will eventually find out that they've been slaughtering and leading the slaughter of the children of their gods. Mm-hmm. And since they're an honor-bound race, would it be possible to maybe give them an alternative to mass suicide, since honor would kind of demand that, and say, hey, why don't you come indenture to us? Have a Spartan 2 with the squad of Sangheili helping to clean up the stuff.
Hypothetically speaking, I think you are going to enjoy Karen's offering a little bit later this year. she's given a few tips to what's going to be coming in there, and she's also got she and Frank and Mr. Ellis here had a really interesting conversation about her book in our podcast from San Diego Comic Convention. So if you have a chance, you can check that out. But yeah, I mean, finding a new motivation. Everybody has to keep going. The people that don't opt, like you say, just to kind of quit or give up or try to make amends through some kind of a suicide. But you know, and I don't think that there is necessarily going to be one answer for that. Like, not all elites feel the same way. Not all of us, if we were faced with that challenge, would react in the same way as well. Some of us would be very sad. Some of us would find a new direction to go. Some of us would find ways to justify continuing to believe what we've just been told quite certainly is a lie, just because that's what we know and that's what we're comfortable with, and moving on is kind of scary. So you know, I think, like I said, Karen has done some wonderful things along these lines in her book later on this year, so I'm not going to say much more because she says it way better than I do.
Karen, thank you then. I really look forward to seeing the exchange of culture between the Sangheili and humanity.
Right.
Thanks.
This one's for Karen. Well, two questions. Did you have any backstory with Halo, or was this like writing this book was like a completely new thing for you?
Yeah.
Did you have any like experience with Halo, or was coming at and writing this book like a completely new thing for you?
No, I actually don't write for any franchises that I already know, because I can't approach it as a writer. I've got to come to it cold. I have to go through that exploration process. I don't play the games. I mean, I actually write games, but I don't play them. I have to keep myself separate from that process. If I know too much about a franchise before I engage with it as a writer, it totally distorts what I do. I have to treat it as a journalist, as a news subject, and going through it a step at a time. And that's why I see things in it that other people don't, because it is new territory to me. I don't take anything as a given. I end up asking questions, and people say, well, we hadn't thought of that because we'd always accepted it the way it was. For me, it's brand new, and some of the situations look, you know, really weird, and I say, yeah, but what happened there? Why did she do that? Why didn't they ask her that question? How did she get away with that? Why did he do that? And, you know, that's what I bring to the party, is this really cold, dispassionate view. Apart from the fact that with the range of stuff I do, there's no way I could ever be familiar with everything anyway, but it's almost more than that. It almost rules it out. People often say to me, are you a fan of this or are you a fan of that? Absolutely not. I'm not a fan of anything that I work on. I can't, because I don't write fan fiction.
Nope.
And that's what you get, you see. So yes, I came to it cold. There's always the learning curve in terms of getting up to speed with the continuity and the vibe. But I mean, I've been doing this for a long time now, and it's something I've got a formula for doing. And driving Kevin mad, you know, asking him endless questions about it, like, you know, if I do this, does that cut across anything else? And what is your version of this? And what do you call that in Halo? Or do you have this in Halo at all? So I've always got that, but this sort of framework is really what drives the fiction, and that's something you can do with. I'm pretty sure you can do it with any subject. I mean, that's what journalists do. We come to everything cold. You don't know what you're going to get given when you walk into the newsroom in the morning, and you've got to be an expert on it within half an hour or faster. So, I mean, fiction's much slower, so you've got plenty of time to come to grips with it. You've got weeks.
Yeah, we're very lucky actually to be able to work with creative people, very talented people like everybody sitting to my right. And they can bring what they do to the picture, and we can supply them with all of the Halo history and backstory and details. Spent a lot of time with Karen, working with myself and Frank and Jeremy Patnaud on the franchise team, Corinne, everybody. We can provide them with all the Halo they want, and then we help them do what they do best. Although I will actually correct you on one thing, Karen. You said you're not a fan of anything Halo. Except there is one thing.
Absolutely, yes. Sorry. When I was first asked to do Halo, a friend of mine who's a real Halo head said, I don't want you to do this until you've been through this process. And she sent me this link and said, I want you to click on this link, and I don't want to hear any whining from you about how much time you've lost following this link. So I thought, well, how much damage can it do? And I clicked on it, and I got red versus blue. Anyway, three. Something like 2 days later, I surfaced, having gone through the entire, I think it was 8 series at that stage. And I just sent her this note saying, well, I won't actually say what I called her, but I basically said, she was to blame for me losing 48 hours of my life. But I absolutely love it. The funny thing is, I don't actually see it as Halo. I know it's really weird, but I've had to put that dividing line in the middle. Although I have to be honest, there is something special in Glasslands for them, and I hope it's a sort of token of my love and devotion to them.
Okay, thank you. I think that pretty much sums up my second question too, but okay.
Thank you.
All right, this is for all the writers. When you created the Halo stories that are being published, how much of the story and content was yours that you created, and how much of that was already pre-existing from, let's say, like the Halo Bible or things similar to such things like that?
Sorry, this one for Greg or for me?
I mean, I think for me, kind of being on both sides with the pieces that I've written, is that all the raw materials, I mean, like the places and some of the characters and the events and the themes and motivations, those things are all, those all have to be pulled from the existing Halo universe so that they all feel like proper Halo stories. And then, like I mentioned a minute ago, that's what we can provide to all of the amazingly creative and talented people that we have worked with us on the stories. But then every writer brings their own perspective to it. I mean, if you look at Evolutions, for example, short story compilation that we put out a little while ago, every one of those stories is different. My story is different from Frank's story, is different from John Goff's story, is different from Karen's story in there. And that's great, but they're all Halo stories because they all pull from the same well of themes that we've all been lucky enough to kind of fall in love with over the last 10 years of the franchise. So it's a lot of Halo, and on those, for example, it was a little bit of me. And that's how we keep pushing the universe in new directions. If it was all the same tone and all the same style and all the same prose, after a while you'd say, oh yeah, I did that. So we're very fortunate, like I said earlier, to be able to have people like Greg writes a very different kind of book than Karen, and that's awesome. That's perfect. I mean, that's what we need to do to the universe to keep it fresh and keep it interesting.
I always compare it to playing with your toys. Of like, you've got a certain set of action figures, and that day you come up with whatever story you come up with. And you're like, it's always, your Master Chief action figure, but the story today is going to be different than the story yesterday.
343 sent me back 100,000 years ago and left me there. And there were a few hints as to what we needed and a lot of canon we had to fulfill. But I think about, with a little guidance, I had to make all this stuff up and figure it out, like the look of the Forerunners. What do they really look like? We had a lot of fan input, a lot of artist input, but it was very sketchy. So I have to make decisions, and then I have to run it past good people who tell me whether or not they work. And so it's really interesting to do that sort of thing. Usually when I'm writing a book and writing alone, I don't have a whole staff of creative people to help me out, so I really appreciate it, and I kind of want them on call all the time now, but I don't think I'll get that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This question is for Ms. Travis. You were, in a past franchise, you were able to add a lot of new and cool stuff to it and expound on subjects that didn't have much information about them. Are you going to be able to do this? Well, were you able to do this in your new book that's coming out?
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the big gaps that I suddenly saw. I mean, I don't create material for the sake of it. When I look at a story, I think what questions need to be answered, and I also like to see the different viewpoints. And when I looked at the Sangheili, there's a huge gap in them. What do they do at home? What do they watch on the telly? And one of the things that I do in my own series is to look at alien cultures, and I had a real lot of fun with the Sangheili. If you can give me 3 or 4 facets of a civilization, things like the way they name each other, how they're, whether they've got central government, just a few random things like that, and I can extrapolate a complete civilization from that. And I'm just wondering how far I go with this about that particular topic.
a little bit.
Yeah, I think we'll draw a. You will see things about their culture that look quite minor that then become very significant in the plot with the humans. And we've got one particular human character who is a civilian who goes along as an expert to talk to the Sangheili because he can speak their language and he's an anthropologist. But he's also got a peculiar skill that the Sangheili are just really bowled over by, which it's just a sort of kid's thing for him, but it's something that they can't do. And he rapidly becomes quite famous for this bizarre trick, and I won't spoil it for you, but it's just one of these things it's one of these things that came up at random. I thought, what would these guys do? What would sum up their culture? What would come up their civilization? What sort of things would they cherish? And I found one particular thing they cherished, and then thought, yeah, that's become a cipher for their whole civilization, and it almost sort of started to take over and became a theme of its own. But yeah, there's a lot of backfill to do. Clearly, things like the human side of it are you've automatically got the military structure there. So there's not a lot I can do with that. Although I've been sort of refining, shall we say, a few things and making them a bit more like the military world that I know. And giving some backstories to situations that aren't so much about the Haloverse, but about the way that people in uniform live and the things they do, and the little weird rituals they have and things like that. So that's been fleshed out too. I'm not sure what else I'm going to do because I'm now looking at book 2 and I'm thinking, what other gaps have we got? But when I say gaps, I don't mean I'm filling it for the sake of it. I'm not like a dog marking the lamppost and going, that bit's mine. That is just a horrible vibe, and I know writers do that in certain universities. I'm not here to spray the lamppost. I'm actually here to enrich the IP and tell the story that needs telling, and I add as little as possible. But clearly I've got huge leeway with this, so I can't just sit there and go, well, I'm just going to rework your stories. I've got to add something fresh to it, and I can only tell stories certain ways. The only way I know how to tell these stories is to look at the people and see the world as they see it. And in order to see the world as they see it, you've got to have their culture and backstory. You've got to know why they're thinking what they're thinking, because you're right in their heads. There can't be gaps that you don't know because you've actually lived this life. You've been brought up in a keep and you don't know who your father is. How do you view the world if there are loads of male relatives around and you don't know who your father is, but your mother knows? There's really weird questions in there that just riveted me, and I thought, how does that shape their whole culture, the way they trust people? The way the males bond. There's all these gaps that were just begging to be filled. So yeah, you will see a fair bit filled in, yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right, I think this is going to have to be, unfortunately, our last question. But everyone else that is in line, we are going to be doing a signing. We have a lot of copies of Cryptum that we can hopefully be handing out. Frank's going to go ahead and hand those out to everyone else in line. So
my question is for all of you. Obviously, Halo was Bungie's child. And so my question is, in the past, it must have been difficult working in a universe where both Bungie and Microsoft had their say in what was acceptable and what wasn't. So what was the greatest challenge for that? And do you have any new challenges in this post-Bungie world?
Well, keeping track of a universe makes for a busy, just kind of regular 40-hour week. But we had a lot of fun working with Bungie, obviously, learning a lot from them and working with them on putting the universe together, getting it to the state that it's in right now. It takes a lot of communication, a lot of very detail-oriented work, a lot of willingness to kind of push the boundaries when it's appropriate, to figure out when you should find some of those gaps that Karen was talking about. And sometimes when you leave the gaps alone, because we can't do everything at all in the universe, or we couldn't do them all right. So we've got to pick the right stories and kind of find the right themes to push into. Like I said, it's a lot of work back and forth. Everybody sitting up on the table with me, we've all been through the creative process together, and they know there's like rounds and rounds and rounds of reviews, and here's all the assets, here's the pictures, here's the videos, here's the screenshots from 3, from Reach, all this stuff on artistic reference for Eric or for stories for the comics. And I don't know, it's a lot of work keeping everything straight so that the stories are consistent and they all feed each other properly. And we're not perfect. Happy to admit that. Not happy, but definitely will admit that. But we have to keep this narrative moving forward for everybody, and with a lot of good effort and a lot of really smart people. That's what we're going to try to do going forward.
All right. Well,
I think I
thanks
said all
again,
the words.
everyone, for coming to the panel. Like I said, we're going to be handing out some copies of Halo Cryptum and doing signing here to the side. So thanks again. And we have another panel coming up, the Halo Anniversary Campaign Discussion. I believe that starts at 5 p.m. Thanks, everyone.